The moment Eleanor Sutherland stepped off the stagecoach in Fort Laramie, Wyoming, on that sweltering afternoon in June 1878, she heard the whispers begin like rattlesnakes hissing in the tall grass. Her right leg dragged slightly as she descended the steps, the result of a childhood fever that had left her with a permanent limp, and she caught the sideways glances from the townspeople gathered near the general store. She held her head high despite the familiar sting of judgment, her chestnut hair pinned neatly beneath her bonnet, her green eyes fixed straight ahead as she collected her worn leather trunk from the driver. "Look at that poor creature," an older woman muttered to her companion, not bothering to lower her voice. "What's a crippled girl doing way out here?" Eleanor's fingers tightened on the handle of her carpetbag, but she did not turn around. She had heard worse in her 22 years, had endured crueler remarks in the civilized streets of Philadelphia, where she had grown up. After her father died 6 months ago, leaving her with nothing but debts and distant relatives who viewed her as a burden, she had answered an advertisement for a seamstress position in this frontier town. The salary was modest, but it came with room and board above the dress shop. And most importantly, it was 3,000 miles away from the pitying stares and disappointed sighs of her mother's sister, who had made it abundantly clear that no man would ever want a wife who could not walk properly. The main street of Fort Laramie stretched before her, a dusty ribbon lined with wooden buildings that seemed to waver in the heat. The fort itself stood on a nearby hill, its American flag snapping in the wind, while the civilian settlement had grown up around it like wildflowers after rain. Eleanor began walking toward the address she had been given, her uneven gait kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. She had learned long ago to move with purpose, to act as though her limp was nothing more than an inconvenience she barely noticed, even when her hip ached and her leg throbbed with fatigue. "Careful there, miss," a man called out as she passed the saloon, and his companions laughed. "Looks like you already had too much whiskey." Heat flooded Eleanor's cheeks, but she pressed her lips together and continued walking. The dress shop was just ahead, its sign painted with careful lettering that read, "Mrs. Callahan's Fine Dresses and Alterations." She was reaching for the door handle when it suddenly swung open, and a tall woman with iron-gray hair and sharp blue eyes appeared. "You must be Miss Sutherland," the woman said, looking her up and down with an assessing gaze. "I'm Margaret Callahan. You're punctual, I'll give you that. Come inside before you melt in this heat." The interior of the shop was blessedly cool, its walls lined with bolts of fabric in every color imaginable. A dress form stood in the corner draped with half-finished garment, and a large cutting table dominated the center of the room. Eleanor set down her bags and turned to face her new employer, preparing herself for the inevitable questions about her leg, but Mrs. Callahan simply gestured toward a narrow staircase at the back of the shop. "Your room is upstairs. It's small but clean. You'll take your meals with me and my husband in our quarters next door. Work begins at 7 each morning and we close at 6 unless there's a special order. Can you sew as well as your letter claimed?" "Yes, madam," Eleanor said, relief washing over her. "I can do everything from basic mending to complex alterations. I also have experience with embroidery and lace work." "Good. I have 3 wedding dresses that need finishing before the end of the month, and half the women in this territory seem to have decided they need new Sunday clothes all at once." Mrs. Callahan's stern expression softened slightly. "You look exhausted, child. Go rest for a few hours. We'll discuss your duties in detail over supper." Eleanor climbed the stairs slowly, grateful for the railing, and found her new home to be exactly as described. The room was barely large enough for a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a washstand, but the window overlooked the main street and let in plenty of light. She sank onto the bed and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. She had made it. She was here, in this wild place so far from everything she had known, and perhaps here she could build a life where her limp did not define her entirely. That first week passed in a blur of needle and thread, fabric and pins. Eleanor quickly discovered that Mrs. Callahan was demanding but fair, expecting excellent work, but also genuinely appreciating skill when she saw it. The other women who came into the shop treated Eleanor with varying degrees of curiosity and condescension, but she focused on her work and tried to ignore the comments about how it must be so difficult to stand all day with her condition, or how fortunate she was to have found indoor work since she certainly could not manage anything more strenuous. It was on her 8th day in Fort Laramie that she first saw Garrett Zimmerman. Eleanor had finished her work early and decided to walk to the general store to purchase some hair pins and a bar of lavender soap with her first week's wages. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the street was busy with people finishing their daily business. She was carefully navigating around a group of children playing in the dirt when someone bumped into her from behind, sending her stumbling forward. Her bad leg gave out beneath her, and she fell hard onto her knees in the middle of the street. Pain shot through her hip, and for a moment she could not breathe. Around her, people stopped and stared, and she heard the familiar sound of poorly suppressed laughter. Tears of humiliation burned behind her eyes as she struggled to gather her skirts and push herself upright, but her leg refused to cooperate. "Here, let me help you." The voice was deep and gentle, and suddenly a strong hand appeared in her field of vision. Eleanor looked up and found herself staring into the warmest brown eyes she had ever seen. The man crouched beside her was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly beneath his worn Stetson hat. His face was all strong lines and weathered handsomeness, and when he smiled at her, something fluttered strangely in her chest. "Thank you, but I can manage," she said automatically, the response so ingrained after years of refusing assistance that it came out almost sharp. "I'm sure you can," he replied easily, not moving. "But that does not mean you have to. Let me help you up, and then you can tell me if I should hunt down whoever knocked you over and teach them some manners." Despite herself, Eleanor found her hand reaching for his. His grip was warm and calloused, his strength evident as he pulled her to her feet with easy grace. She swayed slightly as she tested her weight on her bad leg, and his other hand came to rest gently on her elbow, steadying her without making her feel trapped. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her face with genuine concern. "Only my pride," Eleanor admitted, then wished she could take back the words. She never showed weakness, never admitted to the pain or embarrassment, but something about this stranger made her feel oddly safe. "Pride heals faster than bones," he said, and there was kindness in his voice rather than pity. "I'm Garrett Zimmerman. I run the horse ranch about 5 miles west of town. Eleanor Sutherland. I work at Mrs. Callahan's dress shop." "Well, Miss Sutherland, would you allow me to walk you wherever you were heading? Not because I think you cannot make it yourself, but because I was heading in that direction anyway, and my mother raised me to be polite to ladies I've just met." Eleanor knew she should refuse. She had learned to be self-sufficient, to never rely on anyone else, especially not handsome cowboys who would eventually realize she was not like other women and would disappear like morning mist. But the pain in her hip was sharp, and the general store was still 2 blocks away, and something in Garrett's expression told her he would not mock her if she accepted. "The general store," she said quietly. And I suppose if you were already going that way, I cannot stop you." They walked slowly, and Eleanor was acutely aware that Garrett matched his pace to hers without comment or apparent impatience. He did not stare at her limp or make a show of helping her over uneven patches in the road. Instead, he talked easily about the town, pointing out various buildings and telling her stories about the people who owned them, his voice warm and animated. "That's Doc Harrison's office there," he said, gesturing to a neat white building. "He once delivered twin calves for me at 2 in the morning during a thunderstorm. Man's got steady hands and a good heart. And over there is the smithy, run by Tom Cooper. Best farrier in 3 territories, though he'll argue with you about the proper way to shoe a horse for about 3 hours if you let him." "How long have you lived here?" Eleanor asked, surprised to find herself genuinely curious. "All my life. My father came out here in '58, before I was born. He built the ranch from nothing, just him and my mother and whatever dreams they carried in their hearts. They both passed 5 years back, within months of each other. It's just me now, me and about 50 horses and a couple of ranch hands who are more family than employees at this point." There was grief in his voice, but also pride and love, and Eleanor felt something in her chest loosen. "I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. And I'm sorry if this town has not made you feel welcome. Fort Laramie can be rough around the edges, and folks here sometimes forget their manners." He held the door of the general store open for her, and as she passed him, he added quietly, "But there are good people here too once you find them." Inside the store, Garrett was greeted warmly by the proprietor, a cheerful man named Samuel who clearly knew him well. Eleanor made her purchases while trying not to be too obvious about watching Garrett as he ordered supplies for his ranch. He moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in his own skin, and when he laughed at something Samuel said, the sound was rich and genuine. When they emerged back into the evening air, Garrett insisted on carrying her small package. "I know you can carry it yourself," he said before she could protest. "But my hands were empty, and it seemed a shame to waste them." They walked back toward the dress shop, the sky now deepening to purple, and Eleanor found herself wishing the distance was longer. Garrett continued talking, asking her about Philadelphia and her journey west, and to her surprise, she answered honestly. She told him about her father, about the advertisement, about her hope to make a new start in a place where she was not defined by her family's fall from prosperity. She did not mention her limp, and neither did he. When they reached the dress shop, Garrett handed her the package and tipped his hat. "It was a genuine pleasure to meet you, Miss Sutherland. I hope Fort Laramie treats you well. Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman, for everything. Garrett, please." "Mr. Zimmerman was my father, and I'm not nearly distinguished enough to deserve the title." He paused, then added, "I come into town most Saturday afternoons to pick up supplies and check on things. Perhaps I'll see you again." "Perhaps," Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice neutral even as her heart beat a little faster. She watched him walk away, his long stride eating up the dusty street, and allowed herself a moment to imagine what it might be like to have someone like Garrett Zimmerman look at her the way men looked at other women. Then she shook her head and went inside. Men like Garrett did not end up with women like her. He had been kind because he was a good person, nothing more. She would do well to remember that and not let herself hope for impossibilities. But that night, as she lay in her narrow bed listening to the sounds of the frontier town settling into darkness, she could not stop thinking about warm brown eyes and a gentle smile, about a strong hand reaching down to help her without making her feel weak. She fell asleep with that image in her mind, and for the first time since arriving in Fort Laramie, she dreamed of something other than thread and needles and the endless work that filled her days. The next 2 weeks established a pattern to Eleanor's life. She woke before dawn and worked long hours in the shop, her fingers flying through alterations and new garments with practiced skill. Mrs. Callahan proved to be not only a fair employer but also a surprisingly kind one. She noticed when Eleanor's leg pained her and would insist she sit for a while, bringing her tasks that could be completed from a chair. She never made a fuss about it, never drew attention to Eleanor's limitations, and gradually Eleanor felt some of the defensive walls around her heart begin to crack. The other women of Fort Laramie were slower to warm to her. Some ignored her entirely, while others treated her with a condescending kindness that was almost worse than open cruelty. But there were exceptions. Mary Henderson, the banker's wife, proved to be genuinely friendly, chatting with Eleanor about books and asking her opinion on fabric choices. And young Sarah Mitchell, barely 19 and newly engaged, looked at Eleanor with admiration when she saw the delicate embroidery work on a christening gown. "Oh, that's beautiful," Sarah breathed. "I could never do anything like that. My stitches always end up crooked no matter how hard I try." "It just takes practice," Eleanor assured her. "I've been sewing since I was 5 years old. That's 17 years of making mistakes and learning from them." Still, despite these small kindnesses, Eleanor felt the weight of being different, of being watched and judged. She heard the comments when she walked to the mercantile or to the small church on Sunday mornings. "Such a shame about that girl. Must be so hard for her. Wonder if she'll ever find a husband." The words followed her like shadows, and she held her head high and pretended not to hear, even as they burrowed beneath her skin. It was on a Saturday afternoon, exactly 3 weeks after their first meeting, that Garrett Zimmerman walked into Mrs. Callahan's dress shop. Eleanor was alone as Mrs. Callahan had gone next door to prepare lunch, and she was carefully pinning the hem of a blue silk dress when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up, expecting to see one of her usual customers, and felt her breath catch when she saw Garrett standing there, his hat in his hands, looking somewhat uncertain. "Mr. Zimmerman," she said, setting down her pins. "This is unexpected." "Garrett," he corrected gently. "And I apologize for the intrusion. I was in town and thought I might stop by to see how you were settling in." "I'm well, thank you. The work keeps me busy." "I imagine it does." He glanced around the shop, taking in the fabrics and the dress forms, and Eleanor wondered what a rancher could possibly want in a dressmaker's establishment. "Actually, I have a favor to ask, if you're willing to hear it." Eleanor gestured for him to continue, curious despite herself. "There's a barn dance next Saturday night at the Thompson Ranch. It's something of a tradition around here, happens every few months, and most of the territory shows up. Music, food, a chance for folks to socialize." He met her eyes, and she saw something almost vulnerable in his expression. "I was wondering if you might consider allowing me to escort you." For a moment, Eleanor could not find words. A dance. He was asking her to a dance, as though she were any normal woman who could waltz and twirl across a floor without embarrassment. The cruel irony of it made her want to laugh or cry or both. "Mr. Zimmerman," she began, her voice carefully controlled. "Garrett, that's very kind of you, but I don't think it would be appropriate." "Why not?" His question was direct but not challenging. "Because I cannot dance," she said bluntly, gesturing to her leg. "I appreciate the invitation, but I would only be a disappointment to you. You should ask someone who can actually participate in the evening's activities." Garrett stepped closer, and Eleanor found herself unable to look away from his steady gaze. "Miss Sutherland, Eleanor, if you'll permit me, I did not ask if you could dance. I asked if you would allow me to escort you. There's more to an evening than dancing." There's food and conversation and music and being around good people. And even if all we do is sit on a hay bale and talk while everyone else spins around the floor, I can think of no one I'd rather spend the evening with." "You don't mean that," Eleanor whispered, but she wanted desperately to believe him. "I absolutely do mean it." His voice was firm, leaving no room for doubt. "I've thought about you every day since we met, wondered if you were settling in all right, if the town was treating you well. I've made excuses to come into Fort Laramie 3 times this week hoping to run into you. And last night, I finally admitted to myself that I needed to just ask you properly instead of hoping for chance meetings on the street." Eleanor's heart was racing now, a wild thing beating against her ribs. No man had ever spoken to her this way, had ever sought her company so deliberately. "People will talk. They'll wonder why you're wasting your time with someone like me." "Someone like you," Garrett repeated, and there was something almost fierce in his tone now. "You mean someone intelligent and skilled and brave enough to travel across a continent to start a new life. Someone who works hard and holds her head high no matter what ignorant things people say. Eleanor, if people want to talk, let them." I stopped caring about gossip about the same time I realized that most folks who spend their time talking about others are just trying to avoid looking at their own lives. Before she could respond, Mrs. Callahan's voice came from the back room. "Eleanor, dear, lunch is ready if you want to come next door." Garrett stepped back, giving her space, but his eyes never left her face. "Think about it," he said quietly. "I'll come by Friday afternoon for your answer, and whatever you decide, I hope we can still be friends." He settled his hat back on his head and left, the bell chiming softly in his wake. Eleanor stood frozen for a long moment, her mind spinning. She wanted to go to the dance with him more than she wanted almost anything, but the fear of disappointment, of inevitable heartbreak when he realized what a burden she would be, held her back like iron chains. "Who was that handsome devil, Mrs.?" Callahan asked, poking her head through the doorway with an amused expression. "Garrett Zimmerman. He runs a horse ranch." "Ah yes, the Zimmerman boy. Good family, good reputation. His parents were fine people, and he's built quite a business for himself out there. The other ranchers respect him, which is saying something in this territory." Mrs. Callahan studied Eleanor's face with sharp eyes. "What did he want?" "He asked me to a barn dance next Saturday," Eleanor admitted. "And you're going to say no because of that leg of yours, aren't you, Mrs.?" Callahan's tone was matter-of-fact rather than sympathetic. Eleanor's defenses rose immediately. "I cannot dance, Mrs. Callahan. It would be foolish to pretend otherwise. There are all kinds of dancing, child. Some people dance with their feet and some dance with their hearts. From where I'm standing, that young man looks at you like you're already waltzing." Mrs. Callahan crossed her arms. "I've known Garrett Zimmerman since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. He's not the kind to make empty gestures or false promises. If he wants to take you to that dance, it's because he genuinely wants your company. But everyone will stare. They'll whisper about us. They already whisper about you, dear. They whisper about everyone. The question is whether you're going to let their whispers determine how you live your life, or whether you're going to grab hold of a chance at happiness when it presents itself." Mrs. Callahan's expression softened. "Your leg may not work like everyone else's, but there's nothing wrong with your heart. Don't let fear stop it from beating." Eleanor worked through the rest of the day with Mrs. Callahan's words echoing in her mind. That night, lying in bed, she allowed herself to really consider the possibility. She imagined arriving at the dance on Garrett's arm, imagined sitting beside him while music filled the air, imagined talking and laughing without the weight of loneliness pressing down on her shoulders. She imagined, too, the stares and whispers, but for once they seemed less important than the warmth in Garrett's eyes when he looked at her. By the time Friday afternoon arrived, Eleanor had made her decision. She had hardly slept the night before, second-guessing herself 1,000 times, but when Garrett walked into the dress shop at precisely 3 o'clock, looking nervous and hopeful, she found her voice steady. "Yes," she said simply. "I would be honored to attend the dance with you." The smile that broke across Garrett's face was like sunrise after a long night. "Truly, truly. Though I maintain that I cannot dance, so if you're expecting a partner for a Virginia reel, you will be sorely disappointed." "I hate the Virginia reel," Garrett said solemnly. "All that spinning makes me dizzy. I much prefer standing still and having interesting conversations." "You're impossible," Eleanor said, but she was smiling too. "I'll pick you up at 6 o'clock Saturday evening," Garrett told her. "And Eleanor, thank you for saying yes." After he left, Mrs. Callahan emerged from the back room with a knowing expression. "I heard that. Now, we have exactly 8 days to make sure you have something beautiful to wear. I'm thinking the green cotton with the cream lace at the collar. It will bring out your eyes." The week that followed was filled with anticipation and anxiety in equal measure. Eleanor worked on her dress in the evenings after the shop closed, her stitches careful and precise as she added delicate details to the bodice. Mrs. Callahan helped her alter the skirt to ensure it would accommodate her uneven gait gracefully. And by Saturday afternoon, Eleanor had to admit that the finished garment was the most beautiful thing she had ever worn. She dressed carefully that evening, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened the buttons and pinned up her hair. She studied herself in the small mirror above her dresser and saw a young woman with flushed cheeks and bright eyes, someone who looked almost pretty despite everything. The sound of a wagon pulling up outside sent her heart racing, and she made her way downstairs slowly, gripping the railing tightly. Garrett was waiting outside the shop, and when he saw her, his expression made her feel like the most beautiful woman in Wyoming. He wore clean trousers and a pressed white shirt, his dark hair still damp from washing, and he held out his hand to help her into the wagon. "You look absolutely lovely," he said, and there was such sincerity in his voice that Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." The drive to the Thompson Ranch took about 40 minutes, and Eleanor found herself relaxing as they traveled. Garrett told her about his horses, about the new foal that had been born last week, and the mare who had a habit of stealing his hat whenever he was not paying attention. His love for his animals was evident in every word, and Eleanor found herself telling him about her work, about the satisfaction of transforming fabric into something beautiful and useful. "I never thought I'd end up as a seamstress," she admitted. "When I was a girl, I wanted to be a teacher. But after the fever left me with this limp, my aunt convinced my mother that I should learn a trade I could do sitting down, something practical for a girl who would likely never marry." "Your aunt sounds like she was not a very kind woman." "She was not intentionally cruel. She thought she was being realistic." Eleanor looked out at the darkening landscape. She was probably right in the end. Garrett was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "Eleanor, can I ask you something personal, I suppose? Does your leg hurt?" "I don't mean to pry, but I've noticed you sometimes wince when you've been standing for a while, and I wonder if there's anything that helps." The question caught her off guard. Most people either ignored her limp entirely or stared at it with fascinated disgust. No one had ever simply asked if she was in pain. "It aches, especially at the end of the day or when I've been walking a long distance. Heat helps and rest, but there's not much to be done about it. I've learned to manage." "You shouldn't have to just manage," Garrett said, and there was anger in his voice, though not directed at her. "You should have help, consideration. The fact that you've had to fight so hard just to be seen as a regular person makes me furious at the world." Eleanor did not know what to say to that. No one had ever been angry on her behalf before, and the fierce protectiveness in Garrett's tone made something warm unfurl in her chest. They arrived at the Thompson Ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. The large barn had been cleared out and decorated with lanterns, and already a sizable crowd had gathered. Music spilled out into the evening air, fiddles and a guitar and someone playing a harmonica with enthusiastic, if not entirely skilled effort. Long tables had been set up outside laden with food, and children ran between the adults, laughing and chasing each other in the twilight. Garrett helped Eleanor down from the wagon, his hand steady on her waist, and offered her his arm. "Ready as I'll ever be," she said, and together they walked toward the barn. The moment they entered, Eleanor felt the weight of dozens of eyes turning their direction. She heard the whispers start immediately, saw women lean toward each other with speculative expressions. But Garrett kept his head high and his arm steady beneath her hand, leading her to a quiet corner where several hay bales had been arranged as makeshift seating. "Wait here," he said. "I'll get us some food and something to drink." Left alone, Eleanor watched the dancers spinning across the floor. The women's skirts flared out as they twirled, their faces flushed and happy, and she felt the familiar ache of being on the outside looking in. She had never been able to participate in dances back in Philadelphia, had always been the one sitting with the chaperones and the elderly grandmothers while everyone else enjoyed themselves. Well, look who decided to show up." The voice was sharp and unpleasant, and Eleanor looked up to see Caroline Porter standing before her. Caroline was the daughter of the general store owner, a pretty blonde woman of about 25 who was known throughout the territory for her beauty and her sharp tongue. "I must say I was surprised to hear that Garrett Zimmerman was bringing you tonight." "Hello, Caroline," Eleanor said evenly. "It's nice to see you." "Is it?" Caroline's smile did not reach her eyes. "I have to say, I don't understand what Garrett could possibly see in you. The man could have his pick of any woman here, and he chooses the crippled seamstress from back east. It's baffling, really." Eleanor felt her face flush, but before she could respond, another woman appeared at Caroline's elbow. This was Margaret Thompson, their hostess, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Caroline, your mother is looking for you," Margaret said firmly. "Something about helping serve the desserts. But I was just talking to now, Caroline." There was steel in Margaret's voice, and with a final nasty look at Eleanor, Caroline flounced away. Margaret settled onto the hay bale beside Eleanor and patted her hand. "Don't pay Caroline any mind. She's been setting her cap at Garrett for 3 years, and he's never shown the slightest interest. She's just jealous." "I don't want to cause problems," Eleanor said quietly. "You're not causing anything. Garrett's a grown man who can choose his own company, and between you and me, I'm glad to see him interested in someone. He's been alone too long since his parents passed." Margaret studied Eleanor with the same assessing look Mrs. Callahan sometimes wore. "I knew Garrett's mother well. She would have liked you. You don't even know me. I know you had the courage to come out here alone. I know Margaret Callahan speaks highly of your work and your character, and that woman does not give praise lightly. And I know that Garrett looks happier tonight than I've seen him in years." Margaret stood up as Garrett approached carrying 2 plates piled high with food. "You two enjoy yourselves. And Eleanor, don't let the Caroline Porters of this world make you feel less than you are." Garrett settled beside Eleanor and handed her a plate. "Mrs. Thompson talking your ear off, giving me friendly advice actually. She seems very nice." "She is. Her husband and my father were good friends." Garrett bit into a piece of fried chicken, then added casually, I saw Caroline storming away with her face all pinched up. Do I want to know what she said to you? Probably not. That bad. His jaw tightened. I'm sorry. Caroline has never forgiven me for refusing to court her. She seems to think persistence will eventually wear me down. She's very beautiful, Eleanor observed, trying to keep her voice neutral. She's very mean, Garrett countered. Beauty does not matter much if the person wearing it has an ugly heart. He set down his plate and turned to face Eleanor fully. Can I tell you something? And I hope it does not make you uncomfortable, but I think it needs to be said. All right. I don't see your limp when I look at you. I mean, of course I notice it, I'm not blind, but it's not what I see. When I look at you, I see the way your face lights up when you talk about your work. I see the strength it must have taken to leave everything you knew and start over in a place where you had no friends or family. I see someone who has faced cruelty and judgment and who still chooses kindness. I see someone I want to spend time with, someone who makes me laugh and think and feel things I had given up hoping for. He paused, then added softly, I see someone I'm starting to care about quite a lot, actually. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears and she blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back. Garrett, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. And I wanted you to know that anyone who makes you feel less than wonderful is a fool who does not deserve a moment of your attention. They ate in companionable silence for a while, watching the dancers and listening to the music. The fiddle player was truly talented, coaxing beautiful melodies from his instrument, and Eleanor found her foot tapping along despite herself. When Garrett finished eating, he stood and held out his hand. Dance with me, he said. Garrett, I told you. I know what you told me, but I think you can dance just fine if you have the right partner. Trust me. Eleanor looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face, and saw only patience and hope. Against every instinct that told her to protect herself from disappointment, she placed her hand in his and allowed him to help her to her feet. He led her not to the crowded center of the barn where couples were spinning energetically, but to a quiet spot near the edge where the lantern light was soft, and there was room to move without bumping into others. The music changed to something slower, and Garrett placed one hand carefully on her waist and took her other hand in his. We're going to sway, he said simply. Just back and forth, weight shifting from one foot to the other. No fancy steps, no spinning, just movement in time with the music. Can you do that? I think so, Eleanor whispered. And so they swayed, barely moving, more standing together than truly dancing. But Garrett held her gaze the entire time, and his hand on her waist was warm and steady. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor felt what it was like to dance with someone. Not the elaborate steps she could never master, but something simpler and somehow more profound. A connection, a partnership, two people moving together in rhythm. See, Garrett murmured, you're dancing. This hardly counts as dancing, it counts to me. His thumb traced a gentle circle on her waist. Eleanor, you walk perfectly into my heart. You always have, from the moment I first saw you. The words were so unexpected, so tender, that Eleanor felt something break open inside her. All the walls she had built, all the defenses against hope and possibility, crumbled in the face of Garrett's unwavering sincerity. She had been so certain that no one would ever see past her limp to the woman beneath, had armored herself against rejection so thoroughly that she had almost forgotten how to accept genuine affection. You barely know me, she protested weakly. Then let me know you better. Let me court you properly, take you to dinners and on rides around the ranch. Let me show you that I'm serious about this, about you. What if you change your mind? What if you decide I'm too much trouble? What if I don't? What if this is exactly what I've been waiting for without knowing it? Garrett's hand tightened slightly on hers. Eleanor, I'm not asking for promises you're not ready to make. I'm just asking for a chance." The song ended, and another began, but they stayed as they were, swaying gently in their quiet corner. Around them the party continued, but Eleanor was aware only of Garrett, of the warmth of his body so close to hers, of the steady beat of her heart that for once felt light instead of burdened. "All right," she said finally. "A chance. We can try." The smile that broke across Garrett's face was radiant. "Thank you." They stayed at the dance until late, talking and laughing and occasionally swaying to the slower songs. Several people approached them, some with genuine friendliness and others with thinly veiled curiosity. But Garrett's presence beside her made Eleanor feel protected in a way she had never experienced before. He introduced her to his ranch hands, two weathered men named Frank and David, who treated her with easy respect, and to several of his neighbors who welcomed her warmly to the territory. When Garrett finally drove her home, the moon was high and bright, turning the landscape silver. Eleanor was exhausted but happier than she could remember being in years. At the door of the dress shop, Garrett helped her down from the wagon and walked her to the entrance. "Thank you for tonight," Eleanor said, "for everything. The pleasure was entirely mine." Garrett hesitated, then said, "Can I see you tomorrow? Maybe take you for a ride if the weather holds. I promise we'll go slow and stick to easy terrain." "I'd like that." He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night, Garrett." She watched him drive away, then climb the stairs to her room, her leg aching but her heart soaring. She undressed slowly and lay in bed, replaying every moment of the evening. The way Garrett had looked at her, the way he had spoken to her, the way he had held her while they danced. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps her aunt had been wrong. Perhaps there was someone who could see past her limitations to the woman she truly was. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Eleanor's life. True to his word, Garrett courted her with patient determination. He came to town every Saturday without fail, and they would spend the afternoon together walking, talking, or simply sitting on the bench outside the dress shop watching the world go by. On Sundays after church, he would drive her out to his ranch, and she fell in love with the sprawling property, with the horses that nickered soft greetings when they saw Garrett approaching, with the simple but well-kept house that his parents had built. Frank and David treated her like a younger sister, teasing her gently and always making sure there was a comfortable chair available when they sensed her leg was paining her. They told her stories about Garrett, about his skill with horses and his reputation for fairness in business dealings, and she could see how much they respected him. Eleanor learned that Garrett had a gift with animals that bordered on magical. He could calm the most skittish horse with just his voice and his hands, and he seemed to understand what they needed before they knew themselves. He introduced her to each of his horses by name, telling her their histories and personalities, and she was charmed by how much care he put into their well-being. "This is Juniper," he said one Sunday afternoon, leading her to a stall where a beautiful chestnut mare stood. She was abused by her previous owner, beaten for being too spirited. When I bought her 3 years ago, she would not let anyone within 10 feet of her. Now look at her. Eleanor watched as Garrett opened the stall door and the mare immediately came to him, nuzzling his shoulder with obvious affection. "She's beautiful. She's strong. She survived something terrible and learned to trust again. Reminds me of someone else I know." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "I was never abused. Maybe not physically, but you've been hurt by people's cruelty and judgment, and you're still here, still brave enough to open your heart." Garrett stroked Juniper's neck. "That takes real strength." As summer deepened into August, their relationship deepened as well. They talked about everything: their childhoods and their dreams and their fears. Eleanor told Garrett about her father's death, about the shame of losing their home and being dependent on relatives who saw her as a burden. She told him about the fever that had taken her health at age 6, about the long months of recovery, and the dawning realization that she would never be like other children. Garrett listened without interrupting, his attention complete and focused, and when she finished he held her close and said, "You're the bravest person I've ever met." In turn, he told her about his parents, about how much he missed them and how hard it had been to run the ranch alone after they died. He told her about the loneliness of the past 5 years, about going to bed each night in the house his parents had filled with love and laughter and feeling the emptiness echo around him. "I thought about selling it once," he admitted, "right after they passed. It hurt too much to be here without them, but Frank talked me out of it. He said that honoring their memory meant continuing what they built, not running away from it. So I stayed, and I'm glad I did. This land is part of me." "It's a beautiful place," Eleanor said, and she meant it. The ranch had become her sanctuary, the place where she felt most at peace. One afternoon in late August, Garrett took her to a spot on the ranch she had not seen before. They rode in the wagon to the far western boundary, where a small creek wound through a stand of cottonwood trees. The air was cooler here, shaded by the leaves, and the sound of running water was soothing. Garrett helped her down and spread a blanket on the soft grass. They sat together, and for a while neither spoke, just listened to the creek and the rustle of leaves overhead. Finally, Garrett turned to her and took both her hands in his. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something." Her heart leaped. "What is it?" "I'm in love with you. I have been for weeks now, maybe from the very beginning. I love your intelligence and your humor and your strength. I love the way you concentrate when you're sewing, tongue between your teeth like a child learning to write. I love how you talk to my horses like they're people, and how you listen when Frank and David ramble on about nothing. I love every single thing about you, and I don't want to go another day without you knowing it." Eleanor felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Garrett, you don't have to say it back. I'm not telling you because I expect something in return. I'm telling you because it's true, and because I think you deserve to know that someone loves you exactly as you are, without conditions or reservations." He reached up and gently wiped away her tears. "You walk perfectly into my heart, Eleanor, not despite your limp, not in spite of anything. You just do, perfectly and completely." "I love you too," Eleanor whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I've been so afraid to admit it, so afraid that this was all too good to be true and would disappear if I acknowledged it. But I do. I love you, Garrett Zimmerman." He kissed her then, softly and sweetly, and Eleanor felt the last of her walls crumble completely. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it's fast, I know we've only known each other a few months, but I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything. Marry me, Eleanor. Be my wife, share this life with me. I promise I'll spend every day trying to make you as happy as you make me." "Yes," Eleanor said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course, yes." They sat by the creek until the sun began to set, talking about the future, about the life they would build together. Garrett wanted to expand the ranch, maybe start breeding horses more seriously. Eleanor wanted to continue sewing, but perhaps from home rather than at the dress shop. They talked about children, about maybe 2 or 3 if they were blessed, about raising them on this land that Garrett loved so much. "I can't promise it will always be easy," Garrett said seriously. "Ranch life is hard, and there will be lean years and struggles. But I can promise that you'll never face them alone. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I've been alone for so long, Garrett. The idea of facing life with a partner with you sounds like paradise." They returned to town as darkness fell, and Garrett walked Eleanor to the door of the dress shop. Mrs. Callahan was waiting, and one look at their faces told her everything she needed to know. "Well," she said, breaking into a rare, wide smile, "it's about time. I was beginning to think you two would dance around your feelings forever." "We're engaged," Eleanor said, still hardly believing it. "Garrett asked me to marry him." "And she said yes, before you ask," Garrett added, grinning. Mrs. Callahan pulled Eleanor into a tight hug. "I'm so happy for you, child. You deserve every bit of joy coming your way." The news spread through Fort Laramie like wildfire. Most people were genuinely happy for them, offering congratulations and well wishes. But there were exceptions. Caroline Porter barely hid her fury, making snide comments whenever she saw Eleanor in town. A few of the older women clucked their tongues and whispered about how marriage would be difficult for someone with Eleanor's limitations. But Eleanor found she did not care. She had Garrett's love and Mrs. Callahan's friendship, and the promise of a future she had never dared dream of. The negative voices seemed small and distant compared to the joy filling her heart. They set the wedding for late September, wanting to marry before winter set in. Eleanor worked with Mrs. Callahan to create her wedding dress, pouring all her skill into the garment. It was made of cream-colored silk, simple in design but elegant, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs that Eleanor embroidered herself with tiny flowers and vines. Garrett wanted to be married at the ranch rather than in the church, and Eleanor agreed wholeheartedly. They would exchange vows under the cottonwood trees by the creek, the place where he had first told her he loved her. Margaret Thompson volunteered to organize the food, and soon half the territory seemed involved in planning their celebration. The night before the wedding, Eleanor lay in her narrow bed at the dress shop for the last time. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Garrett Zimmerman. Tomorrow she would begin a new life, not as the crippled seamstress from back east, but as a wife and partner and eventually, God willing, a mother. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, all the pain and rejection and loneliness. It had all led to this moment, to this man who loved her completely. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the September air crisp with the first hint of autumn. Eleanor dressed carefully, her hands steady despite her nerves. Mrs. Callahan helped her with her hair, pinning it up in an elaborate style and weaving in small white flowers that Garrett had picked that morning. "You look absolutely beautiful," Mrs. Callahan said, tears in her eyes. "Like a princess from a fairy tale." "I feel beautiful," Eleanor admitted. "For the first time in my life, I feel beautiful." Frank drove her out to the ranch in the wagon, which had been decorated with ribbons and more flowers. When they arrived, Eleanor saw that dozens of people had gathered, far more than she had expected. They lined the path from the house down to the creek, smiling and offering quiet congratulations as Frank helped her down. And there, waiting under the cottonwood trees, stood Garrett. He wore a new suit, his dark hair freshly cut, but it was his expression that stole Eleanor's breath. He looked at her as though she were the answer to every prayer he had ever whispered, as though she hung the moon and stars. The ceremony was simple but profound. The local minister said the traditional words, and Eleanor and Garrett repeated their vows, promising to love and honor each other for all their days. When Garrett slipped the gold ring onto her finger, his hands were trembling slightly, and Eleanor loved him even more for his nervousness. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister said. "Garrett, you may kiss your bride." Garrett pulled Eleanor close and kissed her thoroughly, to the applause and cheers of their guests. When they finally broke apart, both laughing, he whispered in her ear, "Hello, Mrs. Zimmerman." "Hello, Mr. Zimmerman." The celebration that followed was joyful and boisterous. Tables had been set up near the house laden with food, and someone had brought a fiddle. People danced and ate and toasted the newlyweds, and Eleanor felt surrounded by warmth and acceptance in a way she had never experienced. Margaret Thompson hugged her tightly. "Welcome to the territory properly, my dear. You're one of us now." Even some of the women who had been coolest to Eleanor seemed to warm up, perhaps moved by the obvious love between her and Garrett, or perhaps simply caught up in the joy of the occasion. Only Caroline Porter remained aloof, leaving early with a pinched expression. As the sun set, Garrett pulled Eleanor away from the party and led her into the house. He had prepared the bedroom beautifully, with candles casting soft light and fresh linens on the bed. Eleanor felt suddenly nervous, but Garrett took her hands and kissed them gently. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for," he said softly. "This is your home now, Eleanor. You set the pace for everything." But Eleanor had been ready for this since the day she agreed to marry him. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "I'm your wife, Garrett. I want to be your wife in every way." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of whispered words and gentle discoveries. Garrett was patient and caring, making sure Eleanor felt safe and cherished. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, Eleanor felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. Afterward, lying in Garrett's arms in the darkness, Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks. Garrett noticed immediately and propped himself up on one elbow, concerned. "Did I hurt you?" "Eleanor, I'm so sorry." "No," she said quickly, pulling him back down. "No, you didn't hurt me. I'm crying because I'm happy. Because I never thought I could have this. I never thought someone would love me like you do, would want to build a life with me. And now here I am, and it's real, and I'm just overwhelmed." Garrett held her close, pressing kisses to her hair. "You deserve this and so much more. I'm the lucky one, Eleanor. Don't ever doubt that." The following weeks settled into a comfortable rhythm. Eleanor learned the routines of the ranch, finding ways to contribute despite her physical limitations. She took over all the household tasks, cooking and cleaning and doing the mending for Garrett and the ranch hands. She discovered she had a knack for the account books, and soon she was managing all the ranch finances, tracking expenses and income with meticulous care. Frank and David welcomed her completely into their makeshift family. Frank taught her how to make his special coffee over an open fire, and David showed her which wild plants were edible and which to avoid. They never made her feel like a burden, instead treating her capabilities with casual acceptance. The horses seemed to sense Eleanor's gentle nature and warmed to her quickly. Even Juniper, who Garrett had said was skittish with strangers, would come to the fence when Eleanor appeared, nickering softly for attention. Eleanor began spending time in the barn, talking to the animals while she did hand sewing, and found their presence soothing. Winter came early that year, with snow falling before October ended. The ranch became a white wonderland, beautiful but harsh. Eleanor learned to appreciate the warmth of the house that Garrett's parents had built so solidly, the thick walls and good fireplace that kept them comfortable even in the coldest weather. On snowy evenings, they would sit together by the fire, Garrett reading aloud from books while Eleanor sewed. Sometimes they would just talk, sharing stories from their days or dreams for the future. And sometimes they would simply sit in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence. Eleanor discovered that being married to Garrett meant being cherished in countless small ways. He would warm her side of the bed before she got in on cold nights. He built her a special chair with extra cushioning for when her leg pained her. He never forgot to ask how she was feeling, and he noticed immediately if she was struggling and would insist she rest. In turn, Eleanor found ways to show her love. She learned to cook his favorite meals, mended his clothes with extra care, and kept their home warm and welcoming. She listened when he worried about the horses or the ranch finances, offering practical advice and emotional support. By December, Eleanor had another piece of news. She had missed her monthly courses twice, and certain other signs told her what she suspected. She waited until they were alone one evening, snow falling gently outside the windows, to tell Garrett. "I think I'm with child," she said quietly, watching his face for his reaction. For a moment, Garrett just stared at her. Then a slow smile spread across his face, growing until it was almost blinding in its joy. "Truly, Eleanor, truly? I'm fairly certain. I thought we might ride into town next week and have Doc Harrison confirm it, but yes, I believe so." Garrett pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby. We're going to have a baby." He pulled back suddenly, looking concerned. "Should you be standing? Should you be resting? What do you need?" Eleanor laughed, delighted by his reaction. "I need you to stop worrying. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, Garrett. I'm not made of glass. But your leg, my leg, has nothing to do with this. Doc Harrison can advise us when we see him, but I feel perfectly fine. Actually, I feel wonderful." Over the next months, Eleanor's pregnancy progressed smoothly. Doc Harrison confirmed the news and assured them that Eleanor's limp would not affect her ability to carry or deliver a child. He did caution her to rest frequently and not overexert herself, advice that Garrett took perhaps too seriously, hovering over her with constant concern. "Garrett, I'm pregnant, not dying," Eleanor finally said in exasperation after he insisted for the third time in one day that she sit down. "Please stop treating me like an invalid." "I'm sorry," he said, looking chastened. "I just worry. You're carrying the most precious thing in the world to me." "Two precious things," Eleanor corrected, placing her hands on her growing belly, "but we're both fine. I promise I'll tell you if I need help." As spring arrived and Eleanor's belly swelled, she found herself overwhelmed with nesting instincts. She and Garrett converted one of the spare rooms into a nursery, painting the walls a cheerful yellow, and building a cradle from wood Garrett's father had stored in the barn. Eleanor sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her stitches even more careful than usual. Mrs. Callahan came to visit in April, bringing a beautiful quilt she had made for the baby. "I'm so proud of you," she told Eleanor, hugging her carefully. "You've built such a beautiful life here." "I couldn't have done it without you," Eleanor said. "You gave me a chance when I had nothing, and you encouraged me to take a risk on Garrett. I'll never forget that. You did the hard work yourself, child. I just gave you a little push." Eleanor went into labor on a warm evening in late May. The pain started slowly, and she and Garrett had time to send David to fetch Doc Harrison and Margaret Thompson, who had volunteered to assist with the birth. What followed were long hours of work and pain, but through it all, Garrett stayed by her side, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. "You're doing so well," he said, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. "You're the strongest person I know. I'm going to remind you of that the next time you want to do this." Eleanor gasped between contractions, and despite everything, Garrett laughed. Finally, as dawn broke over the ranch, Eleanor gave one final push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. Doc Harrison worked quickly, and moments later he placed a squirming, wailing infant on Eleanor's chest. "Congratulations," he said, smiling. "You have a healthy baby boy." Eleanor looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and waving fists, and felt love crash over her like a wave. Garrett bent over them both, tears streaming down his face, and kissed first Eleanor's forehead and then the baby's. "He's perfect," Garrett whispered. "Absolutely perfect, just like his mother." They named him Thomas after Garrett's father and called him Tommy. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Eleanor took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything, learning quickly despite her exhaustion. Garrett was a devoted father from the first moment, changing diapers and walking the floor with Tommy when he fussed at night. He built a special cradle that rocked gently and could be moved from room to room, so Tommy was always nearby. And he looked at his son with such wonder and love that Eleanor sometimes felt her heart might burst from the joy of it all. The ranch prospered over the following years. Garrett's reputation for training quality horses spread throughout Wyoming and beyond, and he began to receive orders from buyers in other territories. Frank retired after 2 years, moving to Denver to live with his daughter, but David stayed on, and they hired 2 younger men to help with the increased workload. Eleanor continued her sewing, taking on special orders from women throughout the territory who had heard of her skill. She worked from home, setting up a comfortable space in the parlor where she could keep an eye on Tommy while she stitched. The extra income was welcome, but more than that, she enjoyed keeping her skills sharp and the satisfaction of creating beautiful things. Tommy grew into a bright, energetic toddler who adored his parents and the horses equally. By the time he was 3, he could name every horse on the ranch and was begging his father to let him ride. Garrett started him on a gentle old mare named Daisy, leading her around the paddock while Tommy shrieked with delight. "He's a natural," Garrett said proudly, watching his son, "just like his grandfather." When Tommy was 4, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, leaving her more tired and nauseated, but she was overjoyed nonetheless. Garrett was once again attentive to the point of being overprotective, but Eleanor had learned to accept his worry as an expression of love. Their daughter arrived in the spring of 1884, a perfect little girl with blonde hair and blue eyes who looked nothing like either of her parents, but was beautiful nonetheless. They named her Rose, and she proved to have a temperament as sweet as her name suggested, rarely fussing and smiling at everyone who held her. Tommy was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. Eleanor would let him bring her blankets or sing to her, and the sight of her son being so gentle with his sister made her heart swell. "We're so blessed," she told Garrett one evening, watching their children sleep. Tommy was curled up in his small bed, and Rose slumbered in her cradle, both peaceful and perfect. "We are," Garrett agreed, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Sometimes I think about that day I first saw you stumbling in the street, and I thank God that I was there. That I got to meet you, to love you, to build this life with you. I think about it too, about how afraid I was to hope for any of this. I'm so glad you didn't give up on me." "Never," Garrett said firmly. "From the moment you walked into my heart, Eleanor, there was no room for anyone else." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. The ranch grew and prospered, becoming one of the most respected horse operations in Wyoming. Tommy grew into a capable young man who shared his father's gift with animals, and Rose proved to have inherited her mother's artistic eye and skill with a needle. Eleanor's leg continued to pain her, especially as she aged, but she had learned to manage it well. Some days were harder than others, but she never let it stop her from living fully. She still walked with a limp, still endured the occasional thoughtless comment from strangers, but it no longer defined her life. What defined her life was love. The love of a good man who saw past surfaces to the woman beneath. The love of children who knew nothing but acceptance and care. The love of friends and community who had embraced her as one of their own. One evening in the fall of 1893, when Eleanor was 37 years old, she and Garrett sat on the porch of their home watching the sun set over the land they loved. Tommy was 20 years old now, practically running the ranch alongside his father, and Rose was 9, a bright and cheerful child who brought sunshine wherever she went. "You remember the first time I brought you here?" Garrett asked, taking Eleanor's hand in his. "You were so nervous, so convinced that this couldn't be real." "I remember. I thought surely you would wake up and realize you had made a mistake choosing me." "Best decision I ever made," Garrett said. "No contest, mine too." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "You know what Caroline Porter said to me the other day at the Mercantile?" "Do I want to know?" "She said I was the luckiest woman in the territory to have caught you, as though you were some prize I won through trickery." Eleanor laughed. "I told her she was half right. I am the luckiest woman in the territory, but not because I caught you, because you chose me." "We chose each other," Garrett corrected, "and I'd choose you again every single day." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. Inside the house, they could hear Rose practicing her piano lessons, the notes occasionally fumbling but generally sweet. From the barn came the sound of horses settling in for the night, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "You ever miss Philadelphia?" Garrett asked. Eleanor considered the question. "Sometimes I miss certain things, the libraries, the shops, the theater, but I don't miss the life I had there. Here I have everything I ever really wanted. A home, a family, work that fulfills me, and a partner who loves me. What more could anyone ask for?" "Nothing," Garrett said. "Absolutely nothing." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 15 years ago, alone and uncertain, bracing herself for mockery and rejection. She thought about the cowboy who had reached down to help her up, and then never stopped reaching for her. She thought about all the people who had told her, explicitly or implicitly, that her limp made her less than whole, that she should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection came her way, that she should lower her expectations and accept a diminished life. And she thought about how wrong they had all been. Her limp had not disappeared. She still walked with an uneven gait, still dealt with pain and limitation. But Garrett had been right that first day when he said she walked perfectly into his heart. Because love was not about physical perfection or meeting some arbitrary standard of wholeness. Love was about seeing someone completely, limitations and strengths, scars and beauty, and choosing them anyway. Garrett had chosen her and she had chosen him, and together they had built something beautiful. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked, noticing her distant expression. "About how happy I am, about how grateful I am for every moment that led me here." She turned to look at him, this man who had given her everything. "About how much I love you." "I love you too," Garrett said, pulling her close. "Always have, always will." Inside the house, Rose finished her piano practice and called out that she was hungry. Tommy came in from the barn, stomping his boots and complaining good-naturedly about a stubborn horse who refused to be brushed. The sounds of their family filled the evening air, and Eleanor smiled. This was her life. Not perfect, not without challenges, but wholly and completely hers. She had traveled 3,000 miles to find it, had risked her heart on an impossible hope, and had discovered that sometimes the impossible becomes real if you are brave enough to reach for it. She stood up, her legs stiff from sitting, and held out her hand to Garrett. "Come on. Our children are hungry, and that stew I made this afternoon should be perfect by now." Garrett took her hand and rose, and together they walked into their home, into the warmth and light and love they had created together. And if Eleanor's steps were uneven, if she limped as she crossed the threshold, neither of them noticed or cared, because she walked perfectly into his heart and he into hers, and that was all that mattered. The evening passed in the comfortable chaos of family life. They ate dinner together at the large table Garrett had built years ago, Tommy regaling them with stories about the new foal who seemed determined to escape her paddock at every opportunity, Rose chattering about her friend Lucy's birthday party next week. After dinner, Eleanor supervised Rose's bedtime while Garrett and Tommy discussed the next day's work schedule. Later, when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Eleanor and Garrett prepared for bed. She sat at her dressing table brushing out her hair, now touched with silver at the temples, and caught Garrett's reflection in the mirror watching her. "What?" she asked, smiling. "Just admiring my wife. Still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." "You're biased, absolutely. 15 years of marriage have only made me more so." He came up behind her and began gently massaging her shoulders. "How's your hip tonight?" "Manageable. The weather's changing. I can always feel it in my bones." "I'll warm some water for you to soak. That usually helps." Eleanor turned on the bench and took his hands. "Garrett Zimmerman, what did I do to deserve you? You said yes when I asked you to dance. That's all I needed." They climbed into bed together, Eleanor's leg propped on an extra pillow the way she preferred, and Garrett pulled her close against his side. This was Eleanor's favorite time of day, these quiet moments when it was just the two of them, the rest of the world held at bay. "Tommy's going to want to start looking for his own place soon," Garrett said quietly. "He's a man now, ready to build his own life." "I know. It breaks my heart a little, but I'm proud of him too. We raised a good man." "We did. And Rose is going to be a heartbreaker in a few years." "I'm not ready for that." Eleanor laughed softly. "We have time yet. She's still our little girl." They lay in comfortable silence for a while, and Eleanor felt herself beginning to drift toward sleep. But before she succumbed completely, she had one more thing to say. "Garrett, thank you for seeing me, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful life." "Eleanor, you don't have to thank me. Loving you has been the easiest thing I've ever done." "Still, thank you." She felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. "You're welcome. Now sleep. Tomorrow's going to be busy." Eleanor closed her eyes and let sleep take her, safe in the arms of the man who had changed everything, who had looked at a limping woman in a dusty street and seen not her limitations but her possibilities, who had taken her hand and led her into a future she had never dared imagine. In the months and years that followed, life continued its steady march forward. Tommy did eventually build his own small house on the ranch property, remaining close to his parents but establishing his independence. He began courting Sarah Mitchell, the young woman Eleanor had befriended in those early days at the dress shop, and they married in the spring of 1895. Eleanor gained a daughter-in-law who was sweet and kind, and the prospect of grandchildren in the future. Rose grew into a talented young woman, her skill with embroidery surpassing even her mother's. She began taking orders of her own, creating beautiful pieces that were sought after throughout the territory. Eleanor watched her daughter's success with pride, grateful that Rose would never know the fear and limitation that had defined Eleanor's own youth. The ranch continued to thrive under Garrett and Tommy's management. They became known throughout the region for their quality horses and fair dealing, and the Zimmerman name was respected everywhere. More land was acquired, more horses bred and trained, and the family's prosperity grew. But through all the changes and growth, the core remained the same. Garrett and Eleanor, partners in every sense, building their life together one day at a time. They weathered hardships when they came a bad winter that killed several horses, a drought that tested their resources, the inevitable challenges of running a large operation. But they faced everything together, their bond only strengthening with each trial overcome. Eleanor never forgot what it felt like to be mocked for her limp, to be treated as less than whole. She made it her mission to ensure that no one in her sphere of influence ever felt diminished for their differences. When a young man with a stutter applied for work at the ranch, she insisted Garrett give him a chance, and he proved to be one of their best workers. When a family with a deaf daughter moved to Fort Laramie, Eleanor befriended the mother and helped teach the community some basic sign language so the girl would feel welcomed. "You're making a difference," Garrett told her after watching her patiently communicate with the deaf girl at church one Sunday. "Changing hearts and minds." "I'm just doing what I wish someone had done for me when I was young," Eleanor said. Making sure people know they matter, regardless of what makes them different. On their 20th wedding anniversary in September 1899, Garrett surprised Eleanor with a trip to Denver. They left the ranch in Tommy's capable hands and took the train to the city, staying in a fine hotel and attending the theater and dining in elegant restaurants. It was Eleanor's first real vacation since leaving Philadelphia, and she reveled in every moment. "This is wonderful," she said as they strolled through Denver's streets, her hand tucked into the crook of Garrett's arm. "But I find myself missing home." "Me too," Garrett admitted. "The city's exciting, but it's not where we belong." "No, we belong in Wyoming on that ranch with our family." "That's where my heart is, mine too. Always." They returned home renewed and refreshed, ready to continue their life together. And as the new century dawned in January 1900, Eleanor stood on her porch watching the sunrise and marveling at how far she had come. 22 years had passed since that frightened young woman stepped off the stagecoach in Fort Laramie. 22 years of hard work and love, of building and growing, of learning that happiness was not only possible but achievable if you were brave enough to reach for it. "Happy New Century," Garrett said, coming up behind her and wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about? About how much has changed? About how much has stayed the same?" She leaned back against him. "About how grateful I am for all of it, even the hard parts." "Especially the hard parts. They made the good parts even sweeter." Tommy and Sarah came over that evening with exciting news. Sarah was expecting their first child. Eleanor and Garrett would be grandparents by summer. The joy of that announcement filled the house, and they celebrated late into the night. When the baby arrived in July 1900, a healthy baby boy they named Thomas after his grandfather and great-grandfather, Eleanor held her grandson and felt the circle complete. This child would grow up knowing nothing but love and acceptance. He would be raised by parents who valued character over appearance, substance over surface. He would never know what it meant to be judged as less than worthy. "He's beautiful," she whispered to Sarah, who smiled tiredly from her bed. "He is, and he's lucky to have you as his grandmother." Eleanor looked at Garrett, who was watching her with their grandson with such tenderness it made her chest ache. "I'm the lucky one," she said. "I'm the lucky one." The years continued, bringing more grandchildren, 3 more from Tommy and Sarah, and eventually several from Rose when she married a kind young rancher from the neighboring county in 1904. Eleanor became the matriarch of a growing family, beloved by children and grandchildren who knew her simply as the woman who made everything beautiful with her needle and thread, who always had cookies in her jar, who told wonderful stories about the old days. Some of those grandchildren asked about her limp as they got older, curious about why Grandma walked differently than everyone else. Eleanor would explain about the fever, about how her leg had been damaged when she was young, and the children would nod and accept it and move on, because in their world, Grandma was perfect exactly as she was. "You've built quite a legacy," Doc Harrison told her one day when he came to check on her. They were both getting older now. Eleanor was in her mid-50s, the doctor nearing 70, and he had become a good friend over the years. Not just the family, but the way you've changed this community. People are kinder now, more accepting. You've shown them how. I just lived my life, Eleanor protested. I didn't set out to change anything. The best changes are the ones we make just by being ourselves. You showed people that different doesn't mean less than. That's powerful. One evening in the spring of 1912, Eleanor and Garrett sat on their porch as they had done countless times over the past 33 years. They were both gray now, their faces lined with age, their bodies moving more slowly than they once had. But when Garrett looked at Eleanor, he still saw the beautiful young woman who had captured his heart that day on Fort Laramie's dusty street. "You remember what you said to me at that first dance?" Eleanor asked. "About how I walked perfectly into your heart, of course. Every word. Did you know then that it would be like this? That we'd have all of this?" She gestured broadly, encompassing the ranch, their children and grandchildren, the life they had built. "I hoped," Garrett said. "But even my best hopes couldn't have imagined how wonderful it would be." "You exceeded every dream I ever had, Eleanor. You did the same for me. You gave me a life I never thought possible. You made me believe I was worthy of love. You were always worthy, I just helped you see it." They sat holding hands as the sun set, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson. From inside the house came the sound of laughter. Rose had brought her children for dinner, and the house was full of noise and joy. This was their legacy, Eleanor thought. Not just the prosperous ranch or the successful businesses, but this. A family built on love and acceptance, children and grandchildren who knew they were valued for who they were rather than what they could do. "I'd do it all again," she said quietly. "Every hard moment, every struggle, every tear. All of it just to end up here with you." "Me too," Garrett said, without hesitation or doubt. "You're still the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor Zimmerman." "And you're the best thing that ever happened to me, Garrett Zimmerman." They stood together, supporting each other as they had always done, and walked into their home. Eleanor's limp was more pronounced now after a long day, but Garrett's pace matched hers perfectly, as it always had. They moved together like a well-practiced dance, two people who had learned each other's rhythms so thoroughly that they could anticipate each step. Inside, their family waited. Dinner was served amid laughter and conversation, stories shared and memories made. And through it all, Eleanor and Garrett sat side by side, hands intertwined beneath the table, grateful for every moment that had brought them to this place. Later that night, long after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Eleanor stood at her bedroom window looking out at the ranch bathed in moonlight. Garrett came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, the same question he had asked 1,000 times over the years. About how that frightened girl who arrived in Fort Laramie 34 years ago could never have imagined this. About how she thought her limp defined her, limited her, made her less than others. About how wrong she was. She wasn't less than anyone. She was extraordinary. She just needed someone to help her see it. Eleanor turned in his arms and looked up at her husband, this man who had been her rock and her safe harbor, her partner and her great love. "You did more than help me see it. You made it true. You loved me into being the person I was meant to be." "No," Garrett said gently. "You were always that person. I just loved you while you became brave enough to let her shine." They kissed then, soft and sweet, the kiss of two people who had shared a lifetime and would share whatever time remained. And when they finally went to bed, curled together as they had been for over 3 decades, Eleanor fell asleep thinking not about the limp that had once defined her, but about the love that had redefined everything. The years that followed brought both joys and sorrows, as all years do. Tommy took over the full running of the ranch as Garrett began to slow down. though Garrett still consulted on major decisions and spent time with the horses he loved. Rose's embroidery business flourished, and she became known throughout Wyoming for her beautiful work. More grandchildren arrived, each one welcomed with joy and love. Eleanor's skills as a seamstress remained sharp even as her body aged. She continued to take special orders, working on her porch in good weather and by the fire in winter, her needle flying through fabric with the same precision it had always had. She taught her granddaughters to sew, passing on the skills that had sustained her through so much. There were losses, too. Mrs. Callahan passed away in 1915, and Eleanor grieved deeply for the woman who had given her a chance when she needed it most. Doc Harrison followed 2 years later, and Eleanor attended his funeral with Garrett at her side, remembering the kindness the old doctor had shown them over the years. But through it all, Eleanor and Garrett remained constant. They were the anchor of their family, the foundation on which everything else was built. They celebrated 50th wedding anniversary in 1929, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren, and it was a joyous occasion filled with love and laughter. 50 years, Eleanor marveled that night as she and Garrett prepared for bed. Half a century. Best 50 years of my life, Garrett said. Though these old bones don't move like they used to, mine either, but I wouldn't trade them for anything. They climbed into bed, moving carefully now, their bodies bearing the weight of 73 years. But when Garrett pulled Eleanor close, when she rested her head on his shoulder and felt his heartbeat beneath her ear, she was transported back to their wedding night, to all the nights that had followed, to every moment of tenderness and passion and deep, abiding love. "You still walk perfectly into my heart," Garrett whispered, "every single day." "And you into mine," Eleanor whispered back, "always and forever." They fell asleep that way, holding each other, two souls so intertwined that it was impossible to say where one ended and the other began. And if Eleanor dreamed, she dreamed of a dusty street in Fort Laramie, of a strong hand reaching down to help her, of warm brown eyes and a smile that changed everything. She dreamed of the life she had built with that cowboy who had seen past her limp to the woman beneath, who had loved her not despite her imperfections, but with complete acceptance of all that she was. She dreamed of walking perfectly into his heart, and him into hers, and of the beautiful life they had created together in the wild Wyoming territory they both called home. And in the morning, when she woke with Garrett's arms still around her, she thanked God for the gift of this man, this life, this love that had sustained her through everything. She rose from bed, her legs stiff as always, and began another day in the life she had built. A good day, a blessed day, a day filled with purpose and meaning and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. Because she had learned all those years ago that a limp was just a way of walking. It did not define her worth or limit her possibilities or determine her destiny. What mattered was where she was walking to and who was walking beside her. And she had walked, with her uneven gait and her brave heart, straight into the arms of a love that had transformed everything. She had walked into a future she never could have imagined, into a family and a home and a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. She had walked perfectly into Garrett Zimmerman's heart, and he into hers, and that had made all the difference.